Semester number 1, lesson number 31. Our aim today is why was Uncle Tom's Cabin an important cause of the Civil War? And we're going to start off by reading and annotating a little excerpt from Uncle Tom's Cabin. And you'll see really the importance of this in kind of furthering the issues between the North and the South. And today we're going to talk about nationalism and sectionalism, and we're going to give focus to slave revolts and Uncle Tom's Cabin. Remember, nationalism is really pride in your one's country, and sectionalism is kind of breaking that pride down into regions. And one of the problems with the United States at this time was, people, they referred to themselves as Northerners or Southerners, not Americans, and that caused a lot of problems. Just to refresh from yesterday, the Dred Scott case in 1857 was a Supreme Court case that ruled that no African Americans were regardless of if they were slave or free, were considered citizens, and they were not entitled to constitutional protection. And it also declared this Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, and said that slaves were property, and therefore they could be brought wherever their owner pleased. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about slave resistance and revolt. And a question I get a lot, with a very good question, is, why didn't the slaves fight back? If they knew that they were probably going to die anyway, or that they were going to have a terrible life, why didn't they fight back? Although open rebellions were rare, they did instill fear in the white slave-holding society. So they didn't happen that often, but when they did, they kind of instilled fear in the white man. In 1822, Denmark Vesey's plans to lead a South Carolina revolt were uncovered. In 1831, Nat Turner led a revolt in Virginia. All right, both of them were killed. In 1859, John Brown, who was a white abolitionist trying to get rid of slavery, he led a raid on an arsenal in West Virginia. He planned to seize weapons and have a slave revolt. All right. Although he failed and was executed, he became a Northern hero, and he became kind of a staple of the importance of the abolitionist movement. And on the right over here, you have the Nat Turner rebellion and Nat Turner being killed. When we talk about why slaves didn't revolt more often, or why it wasn't a more common thing, the concept behind it is that really, if you think about it, they were just so torn down. They were broken down, and their spirits were broken, and they kind of just they didn't have any fight left. A lot of these slaves, they had this is what they had become so used to, and it just became part of their everyday routine, and a lot of them just didn't have the spirits to fight back. A very important piece of literature that came out at this time was Uncle Tom's Cabin. And when we talk about important literature, which we'll talk about plenty when we talk about the 1920s, 1930s, literature is very, very important at this time. And one of the, if not the most important book, was Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, an older white lady who gave an in-depth look at slavery and the horrors of slavery. And what this did was this opened the Northerners' eyes to the immoral activities of slavery, and this intensified Northern dislike for slavery. A lot of Northerners realized that slavery existed. They thought probably that it wasn't great, but at the same time, they thought it wasn't their problem. But after reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, it kind of opened a lot of Northerners' eyes to the fact that change needed to be made, and they had to really kind of step it up. So Uncle Tom's Cabin really opened Northerners' eyes, and it was really a very important piece of literature that kind of led them to the Civil War eventually. The check for understanding. The publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, contributed to the start of the Civil War by A, exposing the dangers of cotton manufacturing, B, intensifying Northern dislike of slavery, C, pressuring the President to support emancipation, or D, convincing Congress to ban the importation of slaves. And we will talk more about that tomorrow. And then we will analyze this quote in a half a page. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln and Harriet Beecher Stowe actually met. And during this meeting, Lincoln was famously quoted as saying the following. He said to her, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." All right. In a half a page, what did this quote mean? And what was the bigger meaning? So we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Have a good night.